Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about Magic, Commander, and anything else while we try and wrangle this whole mental health thing back into wherever it's supposed to be. Now, today I want to talk about the new Commander brackets. So, if you haven't heard, on February 11th, Gavin Verhey released this announcement on the mothership, which is Wizards' home site. And it starts going through, hey, we're making this change for, like MagicCon play, stuff like that, to help match people better, basically. So it breaks down into 5 brackets. I'm going to go through the 5 brackets, then I'm going to go through some of the cards that they mention, and then I'm going to see where a couple of my decks sit. But I have a suspicion where a lot of my decks are going to sit. So let's start with what are they called. So bracket 1 is Exhibition. This is your ultra casual commander deck, and it's where I don't think nearly anybody is going to be sitting. I can think of a few weird cases where it's people that built a deck that's not designed to actually win the game. So that's why it's called Exhibition. So they kind of break each of these down with the experience and then the deck building. So the experience for bracket 1 is to throw down with your ultra casual commander deck. Winning is not the primary goal here. It's more about showing off something unusual you've made. Weird stuff. You're just focusing on having fun and enjoying what the table has brought. For the deck building restriction in that bracket, you have no cards from the Gamechangers list, which we'll get to at the end. No intentional 2-card combos, mass land denial, or extra turn cards. Tutors should be sparse. And I'll adjust that at the end too, because I don't want to put words in their mouth, but Tutors has a very wide range of cards. Next you have bracket 2, which they call the core. The experience here, the easiest reference point is the average current pre-constructed deck is at a core level. So they say, well, bracket 2 decks may not have every perfect card. They have the potential for big splashy turns, strong engines, and are built in a way that works towards winning the game. Well, the game is unlikely to get, ended out of nowhere. Generally goes 9 turns or more is what they're saying. So for the deck building in that bracket, no cards from the Gamechangers list, no intentional 2-card infinite combos or mass land denial. Extra turn cards should only appear in low quantities and are not intended to be chained in succession or loops, and tutors should be sparse. Again, we'll talk about tutors in a minute. Moving into bracket 3, we have Upgraded. The experience there is these decks are souped up and ready to play beyond the strength of an average pre-constructed deck. So they are full of carefully selected cards, with work having gone into figuring out the best card for each slot. Game tends to be a little faster as well, ending a turn or 2 sooner than your core decks. So that would put it turn 8 to 7, essentially. For the deck building of this, you can have up to 3 cards from the Gamechangers list. No intentional early game 2-card infinite combos. Extra turn cards should only appear in low quantities and are not intended to be chained in succession or looped. And no mass land denial. So you see, this is the first bracket where it does not say tutors should be sparse. And I feel like a lot of decks are going to sit in bracket 3. And I'll get why in a minute. So bracket 4 is called Optimized. The experience there is it's time to go wild. Bring out your strongest decks and cards. You can expect to see explosive starts, strong tutors, cheap combos that end games, mass land destruction, or deck full of cards off the Gamechangers list. This is high-powered commander and games have a potential to end quickly. So the deck building restriction here is there are no restrictions other than the ban list. Here's the issue with that. Bracket 5 is CEDH. The experience there is this is high power with a very competitive and metagame focused mindset. The problem I see here is the difference between bracket 4 and bracket 5 is a mindset. And that can be very hard to track at a table sometimes. But here's what they say about it. Mindset is a key part of that description. Much of how it is your approach, how you approach the format and deck building. It's not just no holds barred, where you play your most powerful cards like in bracket 4. It requires careful planning. There's care paid into following and paying attention to a metagame and tournament structure. And no sacrifices are made in deck building as you try to be the one to win the pod. So again, I know people who build decks like that, but would still be in bracket 4. Anyway, the deck building restriction here is there are no restrictions other than the ban list. Let's get into what they consider Gamechangers first, and then I will go over a few of the things I want to talk about. So, what is the Gamechangers list? Well, it's a list of cards that dramatically warp commander games, allowing players to run away with resources, shift games in ways that many players dislike, stuff like that. It says, in addition to that function, you can imagine this as a sort of watch list. Any future bans are likely to come from this list, save for maybe something that shows up in a new set and immediately causes problems, like Nadu. And it does go on to say, now, to be clear, most of these cards are unlikely to be banned. You shouldn't go trading away your guys' cradles in concern. However, it is a clear signal for players to know that these cards indicate a different kind of play, and that others might prefer not to play against them. So, they break down each color, and this is really telling on what colors they think are the most powerful. So it goes in Wooburg order, and then at the end they have multicolor and colorless. So let's start with white. First up in white, we have Draneth Magistrate, which is 1 and a white for a 1/3 human wizard. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So this is a cheap denial creature that makes it so people can't cast their commanders. And I get where that's annoying, but like, now does that bump up my Linden deck because it's a cheap 1/3? Anyway, next up in white we have Enlightened Tutor. Single white for an instant, search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle it, put that card on top. Clean, simple. Next up we have Sarah's Sanctum, which, I mean, I don't own one of those. But it's a legendary land. It taps to add white to your mana pool for each enchantment you control. After that, we have everyone's favorite Do You Pay the 2, Smothering Tithe. 3 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If that player doesn't, you create a treasure token. And then the other one they have here is Trouble in Pairs, which is 2 white for an enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead, and whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. I kind of don't understand why this one is on the list, other than the fact that it can stop your opponents from taking an extra turn. It's just there to help you keep up with other colors. Oh, they're doing 2 things, cool, let me draw a card. Anyway, moving in Wooburg order, blue, which I believe has the largest list. It might be tied with colorless. I didn't actually count. But first up, we have Cyclonic Rift. 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. It has Overload for 6 and a blue, which replaces target with each. So that's just the thing that helps blue decks win, right? Next up, we have Expropriate. This one makes a lot of sense. 7, blue, sorcery, Council's Dilemma. Starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn. For each money vote, choose a permanent controlled by the voter and gain control of it. Exile, Expropriate. This card quite literally can end games if people don't know how to vote. And it doesn't matter what they vote, because if they choose time, you're going to win. And if they choose money, you just take their best thing and win with that on the one extra turn you give yourself. Next up, we have Force of Will. 3 blue for an instant. You can pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost to counter target spell. I wouldn't be surprised if there was 5 other versions of free counter spells on here, but there's only one, and that's Fierce Guardianship. 2 and a blue for an instant. If you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. Odd that the blue one is here, but the white one wasn't. I wonder what that says about power levels of colors. We'll talk more about that when we get to red. Next up in blue, we have Rhystic Study. 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card, unless that player pays 1. I'm honestly surprised that they don't have the fish on here too. But next up we have Thassa's Oracle, which is honestly seen more in CDH than anywhere else, but it's blue for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard. When Thassa's Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to 1 of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. Yeah. Next up we have Urza, Lord High Artificer. 2 blue for a 1/4 human artificer. When he enters, you make a construct, which is the artifact creature that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. You can tap an untapped artifact you control to add blue. And for 5, you can shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Yeah. Next up we have Mystical Tutor, which is a single blue for an instant. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. And finally in blue we have Jin-Cataxius, Core Augur. 8 blue for a 5/4 Phyrexian Praetor with Flash. At the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards. Each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. So, yeah, that just, that's never fun when it hits, but with how much mana it is, if you're not sneaking it into play, there's a good chance it's not going to survive. But that moves us into black. First up in black, we have Bolas's Citadel. 3 black for a legendary artifact. You can look at the top card of your library at any time. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. And then you can tap it and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. I mean, it makes sense because you can, like, chain cheap spells from the top and then just go off, I guess. Next up we have the OG Tutor, Demonic Tutor. 1 and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for a card, put it in your hand, then shuffle. Next we have the other OG Black Tutor with Imperial Seal. Single black for a sorcery. Search your library for a card. Shuffle, put the card on top. You lose 2 life. Next up we have Opposition Agent. 2 and a black for a human rogue. It's a 3/2. It has flash. You control your opponents while they search their libraries. Whenever an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card that they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though they were mana of any color to cast them. Next up we have Turgid, the God of Fright, or her other side, which is Turgid's Lantern. Turgid is 3 black for a 4/5 god with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you can put that card from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. The Lantern is 3 and a black for a legendary artifact. You can tap it to have target player lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card, and you can pay 4 to untap Turgid's Lantern. Let's face it, the Lantern is not the reason this card is on there. Next up, we have the other OG Tutor card with Vampiric Tutor. Single black for an instant. Search your library for a card. Shuffle, put the card on top. You lose 2 life. And finally, in black, we have Ad Nauseam, which is 3 black for an instant. Reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to the converted mana cost. You may repeat this process any number of times. Again, this is like a big combo deck in CEDH, so that makes sense. Next up is red, and know how I said these are not proportional? Red only has 2 cards. Jessica's Will, which is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Choose one. If you control your commander, you can choose both. Add red for each card in target opponent's hand, or exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. The other one is Underworld Breach, which is 1 and a red for an enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has Escape. The Escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus 3 other cards from your graveyard. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. So, I'm sure Dockside would still be on that list if it was still legal. But man, is red just getting the shaft here. Next up we have green, which isn't doing much better than red. There's only 3 cards in this list, and technically one of them is colorless. So first up we have Survival of the Fittest, which is 1 and a green for an enchantment. You can pay a green and discard a creature card to search your library for a creature card. Reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. If they have this, why did they not include Fauna Shaman, which is just this on a creature? But what do I know? Next up we have Vorinclex, the Voice of Hunger. 6 green for Phyrexian Praetor, 7/6 trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced, and whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during the controller's next untap step. Yeah. And then the land that they have here is Gaia's Cradle. Although in white they did the same thing. Serra Sanctum. It's a land. It's technically colorless. Regardless. Legendary land, taps for green for each creature you control. I guess we move into multicolored. Multicolored has 4. 4 that are arguably some of the most talked about multicolored commanders. The first one being Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. It's a green and a blue for a 2/2 human druid. And whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. Then you can pay 5, a green and a blue, to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Yeah. He's definitely a game changer. Particularly if you're in deck that's doing something with, like, I don't know, making artifacts that can tap for mana. Next up, we have Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow, which is one of my least favorite commanders to play against. 1, a blue and a black for a human ninja. She's a 1/3. She has Commander Ninjutsu for a blue and a black. This is the main reason I hate playing against her. One of the best ways to deal with a commander is to remove it enough time that the player can't cast them again. The problem is, Commander Tax does not get tacked on to Commander Ninjutsu. I think that should be changed, but what do I know? Anyway, whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand, each opponent loses life equal to the card's mana value. I've only ever seen one Yuriko deck that wasn't blatantly, like, throwing 12 cost, 15 cost things on top repeatedly. And even then, playing against it was a true slog, because even though he was just doing ninjas, there are some ninjas that cost like 6, 7. Like, they're meant to be ninjutsu'd in for a reasonable cost. I'm just not a fan. Next up, we have Winota, Joiner of Forces. 2, a red and a white for a 4/4 human warrior. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible till end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. I know Winota has shown up in a lot of CDH doing crazy stuff. I've yet to see her do anything in a more casual setting. And then there's just the most hated commander of all times, which is Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. 2, a white and a blue for a 2/3 human advisor. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. It's just the most annoying commander. Anyway, that moves us into colorless. First up there, we have Ancient Tomb. It's a land. Taps for 2. Deals 2 damage to you. Next up, we have Chrome Mox. 0 for an artifact. It has imprint. When it enters, you exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand, and then you can tap for 1 mana of any of the card's colors. The One Ring. 4 mana for a legendary artifact. Indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. You can tap it to put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. Yeah. Next we have Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. This is a legendary land that says all creatures now have an upkeep cost of 1, in addition to any other upkeep cost that they have. If the upkeep cost is not paid, the creature is destroyed. Next up, we have Trinisphere, which is 3 mana for an artifact. As long as it's untapped, each spell that would cost less than 3 mana to cast costs 3 mana to cast. Grim Monolith is 2 mana for an artifact. Does not untap during your untap step, but it taps to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool, and then you can pay for it to untap Grim Monolith. Lion's Eye Diamond is 0 for an artifact. Sacrifice the diamond, discard your hand, add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. Mox Diamond, 0 for an artifact. When it comes into play, you choose and discard a land, or you sacrifice Mox Diamond. Taps for 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana ability. Next up, we have Mana Vault. 1 mana, artifact. Doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay 4 if you do untap it. At the beginning of your draw step, if it's tapped, it deals 1 damage to you, but it taps for 3. And finally, we have Glacial Chasm, which is a land. It has a cumulative upkeep of 2 life. When it comes into play, sacrifice land. You cannot attack. All damage to you is reduced to 0. Oh, boy. I'm already at like 25 minutes. So I think I'm just going to call it there, and next week I will pull a couple of my decks and I will see where they technically fall. But there is one thing I still want to talk about today, and that is the few tutors thing. What do they constitute as a tutor? Because yes, they put some in the Gamechangers as tutors, but fetch lands are technically a tutor. Anything that searches out lands and puts them on the battlefield is technically a tutor. So does having land ramp spells in a 2 automatically make it a 3? Those are some of the questions that I have. That said, I'm going to call it there because I've been talking for too long at this point. So I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulpey of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending, along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.